One of my absolute favorite things about running this channel is reading through the comments and questions that you all have as you are learning to represent yourself when purchasing a home. And the thing that I find is there's generally themes to these questions, or the same kind of questions that pop up. So from time to time, I like to create a video like this where I take the top 10 most frequently asked questions and answer those as quickly and directly as I can. That's what we're going to dive into here. Of course, if you are new here, my name is Nick. I am the founder of the DIY Homebuyer Academy. I'm also a realtor who has gone rogue, and I'm now here to teach you how to buy a home without a buyer's agent so that you can save, in general, around 3% in transaction costs, which for most people is $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 on their next home. It's huge. So that's the kind of thing that you're into. Please do subscribe, like, share this video with a friend. And if you have questions, drop them down in the comments below, and I'll most likely answer them in a future episode, just like this one. But with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Question number 1. What is the biggest mistake DIY homebuyers make when they fall in love with a house? This is a great question, because especially if you're buying a home as your primary residence, the dream, right, is that you walk into the ideal home for you and you just know because you have fallen in love with it. But falling in love with a home can be dangerous in a couple of ways. And I think the biggest mistake that DIY homebuyers make when they fall in love with a home is that they turn off the rational part of their brain, and they get caught up in, I will pay whatever I need to pay and do whatever it takes to get this home. And so if there's a bidding war, they ultimately end up bidding to the very, very top of their budget so that they can barely afford the home. Or once they're under contract, if there are issues that come up in the inspections, they'll play those things off as though those are not big deals, or they'll say, that's a future me problem, but today me just wants this house. And it's that failure to think logically and rationally, to set aside those red flags and to just go all out, where you way overpay for a house or you take on a lot more issues than you really should, that all of a sudden, great, you closed on a house that you love, but 6 months or a year later, you're barely able to make your mortgage, and you're having to replace things like the roof and the HVAC equipment, and you've got tens of thousands of dollars in additional expenses. And now all of a sudden, this home that you thought you fell in love with, you now hate. And I think that we can all liken this to bad relationships that we have been a part of, where the first couple of dates, things felt magical and awesome. And, the partner that you're with, they can do no wrong. And then we've heard the horror stories of people that have rushed into a marriage, and a couple of years later, it's like, ooh, you are not who I thought you were. And unfortunately, the same thing happens in housing. And so even if you've fallen in love with a place, you really want to slow down, take your time, think rationally. It's the number one mistake that I see buyers make, is that they move completely emotionally and they stop thinking about what long-term is going to be best, if this really is a good house at a good price that's in good condition. One other caveat that I'll put to this, though, is there can be some of you who think way too logically about a home purchase, and you will lose out on your dream home over $5,000, $6,000, $7,000. I don't think you should do that either. That if you really love a home, I do think that it's okay to overpay a little bit. I think that it is okay to accept a less than perfect inspection report, because it's your dream home, and because if it's your dream home, it's likely going to be somebody else's dream home down the line. And with reasonable appreciation, most likely the fact that you spent an extra $6,000 or $7,000 on the home in a couple of years, that's not going to matter. Where it gets really concerning, though, is when you're spending an extra 60, 70, $100,000 more than you should for the home, or when you're taking on 50 plus $1,000 in imminent repairs. So there's a balancing act here. And of course, when I meet one-on-one with DIY home buyers, these are the kinds of things that we talk through. Question number 2. If the listing agent says they can help me through everything, how do I protect myself from being taken advantage of? Well, if the listing agent is telling you that they can help you with everything, that is a major red flag. For one, I always encourage self-represented buyers to get a non-agency disclosure signed with the listing agent. As a DIY homebuyer, you most likely will need to work directly with the seller's listing agent, but you do not want that person representing you. That would mean that they are acting as a dual agent, or that they're trying to be your agent as well. And that is a no-go, no-fly zone. You don't want that to happen. And so a listing agent who says that they're going to do everything for you, or they can help you through everything, well, that sounds a lot like agency to me. And so if you hear that kind of language, you really need to define the relationship. As the listing agent, they represent the seller exclusively. They are treating you, the home buyer, as a customer. And that needs to be very clear in everybody's mind. Now, they can be genuinely helpful to you. In fact, they will need to be. They're going to need to show you excellent customer service. And that's things like providing you access to the home for showings, and once you're under contract, for inspections and appraisals. They can also do things like provide you with the standard purchase and sale agreement or offer forms in your area. Now, they're doing this as a service to their seller to help you and facilitate a deal, but they cannot tell you how exactly to fill out those forms. They can't give you any negotiation strategy on price or contingencies. They can't make recommendations. Really, all they can do is just provide you with the forms and help you understand definitions. So yes, you can lean on them to get answers about the property, things that are material fact or that should be obviously known. They can help you with timelines and contractual information to some degree, but they cannot do anything that would constitute them representing you, which would be giving you real negotiation strategy or telling you how you ought to fill out an agreement, or even really making sure that you're hitting the contractual deadlines, because it may or may not be in the seller's best interest for you to blow right through your inspection contingency deadline and boom, all of a sudden your inspection contingency is waived and there's nothing that you can do about it. Question number 3 really has 2 parts to it. The first part is, how do I know if a home is overpriced? The second part is, how do I prove that to a seller? And to know if a home is overpriced, there's really 2 fundamental factors. One is, it's just, what does the market dictate that that house should be worth? And the best way to figure that out is to look at comparable properties that have recently sold, recently gone pending, and that are currently on the market. So by looking at those things, what has recently sold specifically, the more comparable those sold properties are to the home that you're looking at, the better idea you have of what home buyers are actually willing to pay for that home. And you can do this yourself. In fact, I've got other videos on the channel about how to use tools like Zillow and Redfin to be able to look at sold properties and build your own comparative market analysis to determine what a fair listing price for a property is. So that's the first thing that you want to do to figure out if a home is overpriced or not. Then when making your offer, you'll use those comparable properties that you have found to make your argument to the seller as to why their house is overpriced compared to what else is on the market. And you can also use a few other market data points like average days on market compared to how long the property you're looking at has been sitting on the market. So, of course, if average days on market is only 7 days, but the property that you're looking at has been on the market for 45 days, there's a pretty good argument to be made there that a big part of it is price. You can also look at just market trends, and I generally do this by zip code, although you can get more granular if you need to. But just looking at, are prices trending upward or downward? Does it seem like it's more of a seller market or a buyer market? A buyer market is where there are more sellers than there are active buyers. And you can use those data points as well to just say, hey, while there are some homes 6 months ago that were comparable to yours that sold at this price, in the past 6 months, this market has been trending downward. And so therefore, your house wouldn't likely sell at the price that it did 6 months ago. And my offer reflects today's real value of the home. So that's all the first way that you go about figuring out a home's value and making the argument to the seller. But there's another component to it, and that is the property's condition. And some of that is really only revealed during the home inspection. So you might, based upon just what's obvious in touring the home and looking at the photos and comparing it to other homes that are on the market, be able to figure out what a fair market value for the home is and whether it's overpriced or not. But once you start to have detailed home inspections, well, you might find other issues that impact the overall value of the home. Things like issues with foundation or water in the crawl space or basement. Issues like that could be indicative of problems that would cost you multiple tens of thousands of dollars to remedy. And that, of course, is going to have an impact on the home's value. So the better job you do with inspections and getting bids for repairs, the stronger of an argument you're going to be able to make to the seller as to why the home is overpriced compared to the actual condition of the home and the amount it's going to cost you to bring the home up to a livable or safe or satisfactory standard. Question number 4. Is it really possible to save money by representing myself in a hot market? Or does the competition just eliminate any possibility for savings? And I get this question a lot because people are so concerned in hot markets where homes go very, very quick that if they don't have an agent representing them, they're not going to be taken as seriously. They're going to miss out on homes, or they're going to have to overpay anyway. I'll start by answering the question as directly as I can, and then we'll get into some nuance. But yes, you can absolutely save money by representing yourself no matter what's going on in the market. And the reason for this is because a buyer agent adds to the transaction fees. And so by representing yourself, what you're doing is you are removing anywhere between 2 and 3% in transaction fees that are typically paid by the seller. And even if they're not paid by the seller, that would be an extra 2 to 3% that you would need to come up with out of pocket in order to pay a buyer agent. So the way you need to think about it in a hot market is that you are coming in compared to every other buyer who has an agent representing them. You're coming in with 2 to 3% more buying power so that you can offer 3% less than somebody who has a buyer agent. And for all intents and purposes, your offer is just as strong as somebody offering 3% more, but who's asking for the seller to pay the buyer agent. In other words, on a $500,000 home, somebody who offers the full list price but then asks the seller to pay their agent 3%, it's only going to net the seller $485,000. So you could offer $485,000 and the seller makes the same amount if they're working with you versus working with somebody who has an agent. Or you could offer the seller $490, which saves you $10,000 below the list price, but still nets the seller $5,000 more than they would have if they were having to pay a buyer agent. So this is really the way that you save money. It's thinking about how you leverage that savings in transaction costs. By not having an agent, there's one less service provider to pay, and somebody's going to benefit from that, whether it's making your offer more attractive without you having to spend gross amount over the purchase price, or whether that's you coming in a bit lower but being more competitive than other people who have buyer agents. Now, the nuance that I wanted to add to this is that unfortunately, there are a lot of listing agents who, for whatever reason, they have strong biases against self-represented buyers. And if you run into this in a hot market, you might find that, man, it just doesn't seem like these listing agents are taking me as seriously, and they're not going to get my offer in front of the seller like they would if it's submitted by another agent. And I'm not going to say that there isn't some truth to this in certain markets. Unfortunately, the National Association of Realtors and many realtors themselves behave very unethically, despite all the ways that they tout being the most ethical organization and professionals. We all know that that is just not true. And so there is a degree to which you need to anticipate that a listing agent might not be comfortable working with you. And so as a self-represented buyer, it's really important to come prepared. That is, having things like your pre-approval letter, using language of asking for a non-agency disclosure, showing that you have done the work by watching videos like what I create here that just prove, hey, you're not the average buyer who just showed up at an open house or saw a sign on the corner of the lot and is now calling ready to make an offer. No. You are somebody who is far more educated than most home buyers are. And when you can prove that to a listing agent, they're going to take you much more seriously. And that's one of the things that I just help coach people do, and so much of the heart behind the education that I provide here on this channel is so that you come across as somebody who is high intent, very, very strong customer who's ready and able to buy a property. And that way that the listing agent will treat you fairly, even though you're self-represented. But yes, it is absolutely possible for you to save money by representing yourself, even in a hot market. Question number 5 is, can I make my offer stronger without just throwing more money at the seller? What are the levers that I can pull? I absolutely love this kind of question because, yes, you totally can make your offer more attractive without doing anything related to purchase price. And one of the biggest things is the terms of the offer. And so you always want to have a conversation with the listing agent before submitting your offer, simply to ask what the seller's situation is and what they're looking for when it comes to timeline for moving. If they need a period of renting the home back before they get settled into their new home, that alone can be a massive lever to pull, where if you have some flexibility between when you close, or you could allow the sellers to rent back from you for a few weeks, that might be worth thousands and thousands of dollars to them to have a flexible buyer. And so if you can accommodate requests like that, well, that's a way of making your offer far more attractive. The other things would be, with your contingencies, the tighter or shorter you can make those contingency windows, the more attractive it is to the seller. I don't encourage any buyer to waive their inspection contingency, but sometimes instead of going 10 or 14 days on that inspection period, if you can shorten that to 5 or 7 days, that's a lot less risk for the seller to take on by accepting your offer. yeah, you've got to move a bit quicker. And there's a few other things that we can do to make sure that you're fully protected, like getting you a clause that gives you additional time if the inspector recommends you have specialists come out for more inspections. But in general, if you can tighten your contingency timelines, it's another lever that you can pull to make your offer more attractive. And then the third piece is financing. So the more of a down payment that you can come in with, or if you're buying with cash financing, whatever, it all spends the same to the seller. The reason that cash is more attractive than financing is because cash is a more sure deal. There's not a full underwriting department and appraisals and the kinds of things that can derail deals and your get out of jail free card where, sorry, the lender couldn't get me approved for the loan. You get your earnest money back and now the seller has to go back on market. That's why sellers like cash deals. So the more money that you're putting down, the easier or more likelihood the underwriting is going to go smoothly and you're not going to back out of the deal. So bringing more down, conventional loans, like it or not, conventional loans are seen as less risky to sellers than government-backed loans like VA or FHA loans. And I would even frame not having a buyer agent as one of the non-financial, I mean, it is financial, but one of the real benefits to the deal that pretty much any other buyer that's going to look at the house, they're going to have a costly buyer's agent that they're going to expect the seller to compensate. You don't have that. And so that's a lever that I would pull. But this is an area where I'd love to hear from some of you in the comments as well, because I'm sure you have found other levers. And so while I'm trying to make this as brief and quick as possible, if you've got ideas that would help other people out, let us know in the comments. It's a good place to look. Number 6, without an agent, how should I approach home inspections so that I don't get crushed by repair costs later? And this is something that I was just helping a DIY home buyer go through. They had a whole home inspection. That whole home inspection revealed a ton of previously hidden issues, issues with the roof, issues with mold in the attic, issues with mold in the basement, foundation issues, masonry issues with the chimney. I mean, it was almost everything that you could think of. Every corner that you turned, everything that you looked behind is like, oh, there's some massive expense here. And so the best thing to do is be very thorough in your inspection period. Start with a whole home inspection, but look at the whole home inspection as a starting place. And yes, there is some cost related to this. Usually a whole home inspection is somewhere between $500 and $700. It can be a lot more than that depending upon the size of the house. And then you're going to have add-ons for things like radon testing, sewer scope, if you're on septic or well, having inspections for those things. But I just recommend it's cheap insurance to go ahead and have all of those things done, because even if it costs you $150 to do a sewer scope, to just get peace of mind, well, that peace of mind is great for $150 compared to down the line seeing that, holy cow, there was a blockage in that sewer line, and now that's going to be $15,000 in trenching and repairs to that line, which this happens more often than you would think. And in your whole home inspection, your inspector will say, hey, there are some evidences of organic growth, or there are some things on the roof that I saw that weren't quite right, or hey, the HVAC system, that seems dated and I was hearing a sound that wasn't quite good, or electrical, I mean, you name it. They're going to tell you where you need to have specialists to come out. And I recommend when they have specialists recommended, that you schedule those specialists to come and not just do further evaluation, but to actually give you bids to fix those issues so that you really know, you have a more objective idea. You're not just guessing how much does it cost to replace a few windows and doing a quick Google search. Google can be wildly wrong on how much a window costs. You might budget $1,000, but you get an actual window contractor out there and you find it's $3,000 for each window or more. So it's really important to use that inspection period to have as many inspections as possible to collect your bids so that you really have a clear picture on how much is it going to cost to do all of the repairs that need to be done in this home. Question number 7 is related. What are reasonable versus unreasonable repair requests to make? I think the best place to start with this question is to just put yourself in the seller's shoes and just think about, if this is my house and I was selling it, what would I think is reasonable for a buyer to ask for? And of course, your perspective might not align perfectly with the seller's perspective, but it's at the very least a good starting place as a rubric for just, okay, what's reasonable versus are you really going to ask for every little imperfection in drywall or scuffed paint on the baseboards to be touched up by the sellers? Probably not. In most cases, that's not a reasonable ask. The other piece to keep in mind here is what was disclosed and what was accounted for in the original agreed to purchase price of the home. So if the seller says that the roof is shot and we've reduced our list price $30,000 compared to other comparable properties to account for the roof needing to be replaced, and you agree that, yeah, the home was $30,000 below market value, well, then in your inspection period, don't come back and say, well, we need the roof replaced, because you already kind of dealt with that up front when you were making your offer. So basically, anything that you acknowledged was a problem with the home and had already accounted for in your original offer, don't use your inspection requests and response to rehash some of those points. Really, any requests that you're going to be making are things that weren't disclosed, that you did not know about at the time that you made your offer. So if there are new things that are revealed, like there's a ton of asbestos and that's going to need to be remediated, and the cost for remediation is $10,000, and you weren't budgeting for that or planning for that based upon the offer price that you made, and now that changes the math, well, all of a sudden that could become a very reasonable ask. And to some degree here, you have to think through too, not just, okay, putting myself in the seller's shoes, but you have to think from the perspective of, would most other buyers likely want for this issue to be addressed as well? And in the case of environmental issues, this is where it can be kind of hit and miss. Some people are very comfortable living in a house that has asbestos materials. Other people absolutely are not. And this is where you just have to get a little bit creative of saying, okay, it might not be reasonable to expect the seller to cover the full cost of remediation, but most buyers, or at least a lot of buyers, probably are going to take issue with this. So what if we take a happy medium approach where we ask the seller for a credit where they cover $5,000 of the $10,000 remediation, and they give that to you as a closing cost credit? So there are some ways that we can get creative. It doesn't have to just be black and white when we make these requests, but it's really just thinking through, okay, what would any other reasonable buyer be asking for? Putting myself in the seller's shoes, what would I think is reasonable? What would I consider reasonable? And what did I already account for in the accepted offer price based upon what was disclosed and I already knew about the property compared to what was revealed during my inspections? Number 8, when handling the contract myself, what are some of the biggest clauses or protections that I absolutely cannot miss? There are a lot of things here that you want to make sure you have included. And these contingencies, the 3 big ones that I make sure you always have as a DIY home buyer are your inspection contingency, your title contingency, and then if you're financing the house, your financing contingency. So those three things cover you against any major defects in the home. It gives you able to walk away if there are repairs that are just too costly for you to take on. The title report, just make sure that there aren't any easements or liens or restrictions against the property that you were unaware of that you may not want to take on. And then that final financing piece just makes sure that you can actually get funded for the home. And if for some reason you can't get financing, you're able to walk away and in any of those cases, get all of your earnest money deposit back. So those are the three big ones. Anything else really starts to become property specific, like whether or not you need a survey or whether you need to have specific inspections related to a well or a septic system. There could be any other handful of contingencies that, depending on the property and your situation, you may want to write in, like a feasibility study. If there are things that you're wanting to do with the property commercially, you might want to have a clause that just makes sure that you're able to create the wedding venue on the 5 acres that you're planning to buy. And you need some time to look into local codes and zoning issues. So those are all things that, again, one-on-one, we talk through based upon your unique needs. But the biggest caution, I suppose, that I have related to when you're doing a contract by yourself is paying really close attention to the timelines and to how days are calculated, or computation of time, because those days are hard and fast on your inspection contingency or on your title contingency. Like from the time that you get your title report, it'll say in the contract that you have 5 days to notify the seller of any issues or if you're backing out based upon anything in there. Similarly with your inspection, you might have 10 days to make your requests known to the seller from the date of the original contract. And if you don't make your requests known in that 10-day period, you try to ask for the seller to do repairs on day 11, tough. There was an automatic waiver of that contingency, and you now potentially lose your earnest money. So that's the biggest thing that you have to watch out for as a DIY buyer, is how much time you have and making sure that you're calculating that time correctly. Are they business days? Are they calendar days? When do those things start and end? Question number 9, how can I tell if my lender is giving me straight answers regarding rates and fees versus if they're playing games with me? And it's unfortunate that a question like this has to be asked, but I get it. Now, the first way that I answer this is shopping multiple lenders. So I recommend shopping at least 2, sometimes 3 or 4 lenders, and getting different perspectives from perhaps a mortgage broker, a local lender, a credit union, and then maybe a big bank. But to have all of them send you their loan estimates, that's going to show you what your rates are, what the bank's fees are, and from those multiple estimates that you get, you'll start to understand a baseline of, okay, this fee seems in line, average, normal, versus like, whoa, this bank charges way more. This lender's origination fees are really high, or why is the rate so much different from this lender to this lender? And that's going to lead to you being able to ask questions of these lenders about their fees and about the rates, and start to develop more of a relationship with these different lenders. And then you really kind of have to trust your gut. For one, as you present the different loan estimates that you've gotten from other institutions, you may just find that those local lenders will start to sharpen their pencils, and they might reduce their fees a little bit or find a way to get you a slightly better rate. So that's an immediate benefit of shopping multiple lenders. But also, you'll find who just seems to give you the best answers, who's the quickest to respond, who do you just naturally gravitate towards and trust. And then once you've chosen the lender that you're going to work with, it's really important to just stay in constant communication with them. Because you've shot multiple and hopefully chosen the person that you like working with the best, you want to keep that relationship going so that anytime you have questions throughout the underwriting process, if you see that, whoa, from my loan estimate, all of a sudden these fees change significantly or my rate changed significantly, you want to be able to have the candid conversation with your lender about why, what happened, and make sure that the answers that they're giving you make sense. And if it doesn't, well, you can always call one of those previous lenders to get a second opinion and say, hey, does that make sense? And it's quite possible, if the lender is playing games, it's very possible to be able to change lenders depending on how long your escrow period is and how long it takes for the bank to underwrite your loan. So don't be afraid of that as a last resort possibility, that if you do have a lender who told you one thing up front and things radically changed before closing, there may be some remedies where you're able to potentially switch lenders before you close on the home. But communication, just building that trust and essentially having a real relationship with your lender is kind of the best safeguard against having somebody who's playing games with you. And number 10, what is the smartest thing that a DIY home buyer can do before ever touring a house? Well, besides subscribing to the DIY Homebuyer channel here and going through all of my content and meeting with me so that you're the most educated DIY homebuyer that there possibly is. I mean, that's a really smart way to go before ever touring a house. But apart from that, making sure that you've got all your financial ducks in a row. We were just talking about lending, but it is so important to have that pre-approval letter because, one, it's going to have agents, listing agents and sellers take you so much more seriously right off the bat. No seller or listing agent wants to waste their time showing a house to somebody who isn't already qualified for that home. And frankly, you don't want to waste your time looking at homes that you don't know whether or not you can afford them. So have your actual pre-approval letter ready to go. Have your proof of funds for your down payment in case the seller or listing agent wants verification of proof of funds, and then just be educated. And that's educated on the home buying process. You don't have to know everything, but just by going through some of my content and having a rough outline for how the home buying process works is going to put you ahead of the game so that you can speak intelligently with the listing agent. That's going to just help develop so much more rapport and goodwill when they're treating you as a customer and when they have to report back to the seller of, hey, this self-represented buyer, do you think that they have the competency to actually go all the way through the deal and not create headaches and frustrations for us? You want for the listing agent to be able to say, yeah, based on all of my interactions with them, they seem really solid. And educating yourself, spending the time to understand what goes into a real estate transaction, making sure that you're ready to walk that road, that's going to get you a long, long way. And it's well worth it because, again, we're talking about saving tens of thousands of dollars by representing yourself. So I hope that this is helpful. I also hope that it raises more questions because, again, I love doing this. So if you have more questions, drop those in the comments below. I'll respond to as many of them as I possibly can in as much detail as I can, but a lot of them I'll probably save for a follow-up video in the next couple of weeks. Thank you all for being here. Again, do subscribe, share this with somebody. Let me know what you think. Get in touch, Nick at DIYHomebuyerAcademy.com, and I will see you in the next one. Until then, happy home buying.